Hello and welcome back to No Bullshit. Today we're talking about a recently trending news article featuring an actor from the famous 90s sitcom TV show called Friends. Recently, David Schwimmer came out for an interview, which turned into him self-flagellating about his so-called privilege the entire time. This led to him suggesting a woke reboot of the show Friends, and well, it all went downhill from there. And believe it or not, but David actually even angered a number of people on his own Hollywood liberal side with this one. Things got really out of control to say the least. And Schwimmer and his biased beliefs and this woke Friends reboot idea, well, they're all wrong too, certainly. We're going to go over all that today and more, but first, let me take a few seconds to tell you guys about my new No Bullshit membership program and our upcoming podcasts. Recently, I announced No Bullshit will be starting to offer members-only perks here on the YouTube website. This website approved me for memberships about a month ago, so now you can click on the join button below videos and donate to help keep this show afloat. And if you do, not only will you have my undying respect and gratitude, thank you very much, but also the first 100 members will get featured in the credits at the end of upcoming videos. Only a few of those spots are left though, so act quickly. In addition, I'll also be doing live streams more, starting a podcast of sorts where I'll have on guests and also will occasionally talk to members of the channel who will get special invites to come and join me on the live show. There we can talk about news, politics, movies, gaming, pop culture, and whatever else you guys are interested in. It's going to be a lot of fun and much more is to come soon too, so make sure you guys check out our membership program, link to that below in this video's description, or again, you can also press the join button below any video on this channel. Thanks for your time and support, it's greatly appreciated, and now, back to the show. Great, now that that's out of the way, let's talk more about this David Schwimmer story. First and foremost, let's recap and talk about who this guy even is, because some youngsters might not even remember him anymore. David Lawrence Schwimmer is an American actor and director. Schwimmer began his acting career performing in school plays at Beverly Hills High School. Then, in 1988, he graduated from Northwestern University with a Bachelor of Arts in Theater and Speech. He eventually grew to superstardom, though, when he was cast in the hit comedy TV show Friends, of course. Now, to call Friends a hit show is actually a bit of an understatement. While I wouldn't necessarily call it groundbreaking or strikingly original myself, but Friends was certainly well-made, good old-fashioned TV comedy at its best. And it also happened to grow incredibly popular in the 90s and early 2000s. Friends was a phenomenon, and it remains one of the highest rated, most beloved TV shows of all time, to this day. But before we get too far down that rabbit hole, let's turn back and keep more focused on David Schwimmer. He played Ross on the show, and I have to say, besides maybe Phoebe, Ross was likely the least liked one on there. I was always a Chandler guy myself, and Joey was also pretty hilarious. But Ross, not so much, and I think most people would agree. Perhaps it was Ross's character, him being this sort of beta boy who whines all the time, or even it could just be the actor and how he really is, and how he's unappealing sometimes and just not likable. And maybe, just maybe, David Schwimmer couldn't help but come through in the performance of Ross, and that was eventually what the show catered to. They catered to Dave's weaknesses and made Ross that way too, which does make for good comedy at times as well. At other times though, Ross did become annoying, frustrating, and in general, again, he's not very likable. This didn't hinder the Friends show much at all though. In fact, you might even say having this kind of Ross character on there added to the comedy and the humor. A character like him can do well when he has 5 other great, very likable ones surrounding him. Basically, Ross was the sort of butt of all the jokes. He was the whipping boy, and mostly it worked well because this was a comedy show done for laughs. But when that kind of guy would go on to make movies and have a career of his own, well, that didn't turn out so well. Not to get too negative on David Schwimmer, I'm really not trying to poison the well here. I just wanted to point this out to show you why a guy like him might be frustrated and desperate for relevancy now. Sure, the guy's still filthy stinking rich, but for these kinds of actors, that's actually not enough. They also want to be cast in big roles every year, and they want awards and political influence and relevancy that's above money, or rather, they want it in addition to all their cash. Yes, after they get rich, then they want more things like this, and it really never ends. And what's especially probably getting to David here is, again, he was the least liked person on Friends, and his career has arguably been the least successful since that show finished. And well, when these Hollywood types like this want to get back in the public's graces, and when they get desperate for attention and relevancy, well, in this day and age, virtue signaling and pandering to leftists seems to be their go-to move to try and save them. That finally brings us to the now infamous interview, where Schwimmer spoke to The Guardian about his so-called white privilege. The piece is called, "David Schwimmer, I'm very aware of my privilege as a heterosexual white male." Well, if you say so, DS. I'm not sure you are fully understanding where you might actually be getting your privileges from though. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily even call it privilege either, just you may be getting extra chances and opportunities because of where you were born and how you grew up and who your parents were. Regardless of that though, let's read on here more first and see where this goes, and then I'll debunk this garbage even further. First, the article goes on and on about David's history and his show Friends, and his life and other inane bullshit that matters very little to this video. So let's skip over the fluff of this piece and get down to the nitty gritty and the actually stupid stuff that's said, like this part here. But Friends Renaissance came with a sting. Awkward questions suggested has not aged well. Millennials watching Friends on Netflix shocked by storylines ran a headline in The Independent 2 years ago, noting criticisms of sexism, homophobia, and transphobia. Chandler worrying about being perceived as a gay man. Ross asking a nanny if he is gay, and jokes about Monica's weight. It is the only moment of the interview where Schwimmer appears a little defensive. I don't care, he says, dismissively. The truth is also that show was groundbreaking in its time for the way in which it handled so casually sex, protected sex, gay marriage, and relationships. The pilot of the show was my character's wife left him for a woman, and there was a gay wedding of my ex and her wife that I attended. Okay, well, this is a bit surprising. Good on Dave for pushing back here about those lame claims of all these different bullshit phobias happening. Of course, it's not offensive for a straight man to be worried if people think he's gay. It's not like Chandler was doing this because he hates alphabet people. He just wanted people to know how he really was, that he's straight. No problem there, just like how if a gay man didn't want to come across as straight. Next, they try and act like jokes about Monica's weight were fat shaming or something. Please, this Guardian writer and that headline and story they're referencing, they're obviously a bunch of woke losers who complain about everything, and they probably wouldn't even know a funny joke if it landed right in their face. Weird how reporters like this will pull old comedy shows and their bits out of context, first inappropriately applying modern PC standards onto past works from 20 years ago, and then they also purposely leave out the fact that they're talking about a comedy and jokes and edgy humor and off-color remarks and awkward premises, which sometimes sure border on offensive, but that's what makes these shows entertaining and what makes the jokes funny in the first place. So to suggest we should take all of this talk about race and sexuality out of this show or change it or something, well, that's to suggest they should make the show differently and worse, and it wouldn't even have been a hit or talked about in the first place. Basically, the SJWs want to ruin this show and all of comedy with their suggestions that would neuter it and make it not funny and not popular. And since leftists only go after things that are popular, it's kind of a catch-22 here, isn't it? And this is also the reason we don't get good comedy movies and TV shows anymore, at least not in the mainstream. Friends is also a product of the pre-woke era when it comes to race. Maybe there should be an all-black Friends or an all-Asian Friends, Schwimmer says, but I was well aware of the lack of diversity and I campaigned for years to have Ross date women of color. One of the first girlfriends I had on the show was an Asian American woman, and I later dated African American women. That was a very conscious push on my part. Funny how this real David Schwimmer guy still only dates white women though. And okay, well, I'm going to have to disagree with you wholeheartedly here, dude. First of all, as we'll go over more later, but for now, let me just say, there was already an all-black Friends show called Living Single, and it actually came out a year before Friends itself, funny enough. In addition, there were plenty of other all-black shows in the 90s too, including The Cosby Show, Family Matters, Martin, The Wayans Brothers, and The Jamie Foxx Show. And that's only me getting started, so needless to say, it's not like there weren't already many all-black shows at the time. So what I really think is, David Schwimmer's actually a bit confused here. He seems to think that because his show was one of the most popular ones and it happened to star white people, that that's some kind of issue or problem, when it's really not. He's also acting as if his show pushed out or replaced or hindered black shows from being made or getting popular or something, when it really didn't. Plenty of black shows were happening, the only difference was they weren't as popular and not as many people wanted to watch them. This can be easily explained without any racist justifications too. People just tend to watch shows starring similar kinds of people. Not always, and it's not a big deal usually, but it does happen. And since the Friends cast was white and represented more of the country and the target demographic, well, so what? The United States is a majority white country, and that made Friends have better footing to take off from. But that wasn't the only thing that held the show up. Friends also needed to be supported by many other factors like good actors, clever writing, a supportive network, and much more. But sure, we can admit race might have been a small factor. It's just not a very interesting or offensive one like what's implied. And had Friends been all black or Asian at that time, it would have turned out like those other all minority shows, meaning they wouldn't have gotten as popular. Possibly people could have watched it and it could have maybe had a chance to reach a Cosby Show level of a hit, but that's only if they got lucky. And at the same time, appealing to just 13% of the population is obviously a smaller crowd than the greater 70 to 80%. Now, before moving on, I want to debunk this so-called lack of diversity that Friends had, which sure seems to be true at a very superficial face value, but it's really not when you think about it just a little more. I mean, who's to say diversity has to be all about race and color anyway? White people can be a very diverse group within themselves, just like how blacks or browns can be too. For example, you could argue the Friends cast is already heavily diverse, especially if you consider their different backgrounds and families and interests. First of all, they're half guys and half girls already, and then 2 of the cast are Jewish as well. In addition, Joey Tribbiani is obviously Italian, while Chandler and Rachel seem to be Christian Americans. And Phoebe, well, Phoebe's just a dirty hippie. And also, this show and cast are supported by a supporting cast that provides lots of variety for things too. Like how David Schwimmer mentioned his ex-wife on the show turns out to be a lesbian, and they have an alphabet wedding episode and everything. And there's more you can delve into in addition to that, but I think this taste of diversity is already enough. And if you keep it in mind, you can see that the show did have a bit going on, definitely more than it gets credit for. In addition, this also harps back to what SJWs really mean when they demand diversity here. They actually just want less white people. Having diverse whites isn't enough, like say having Jewish people, Italians, French, Scandinavians, Australians, South Africans, Kiwis from New Zealand, Russians, white Mexicans, or South Americans even, and so on. But that doesn't count at all to the leftist, even though these people and groups couldn't be more different and diverse from each other. Now, with that said, the real problem the left and SJWs have with the Friends show isn't really that it lacks diversity. They're actually just butthurt because it has too many white people. That's the environment I grew up in. I'm very aware of my own privilege as a heterosexual white male whose parents were able to pay for a private education for me. I've always felt a sense of responsibility to give back and to call things out if I see an abuse of power. Well, Dave, I think you're greatly overestimating the privilege you're getting from actually being white, if you're getting any from that at all. I mean, I don't get paychecks just because I'm white, and no one's hiring me because of that race. Sure, David happens to be that color too, but also, and more importantly, David Schwimmer happened to come from parents who seemed to be really well off, and they saved money for their kid and got him into a good school, which gave him a good education. So perhaps you could say he got privilege from having good parents, but I wouldn't even use that term. It's become so loaded in current year, also implying that privilege isn't deserved, when really, these people deserve these benefits. David is reaping the benefits of being born to great parents, and that's a benefit you and your family totally deserve. You shouldn't feel ashamed or upset, and certainly, you shouldn't be apologizing for that either. And if you combine this bit about his privilege with David also trying to knock the Friends show for not being woke, well, I think I can see what's going on here more. David has a sort of survivor's guilt going on here. He knows he was born well off and he got super lucky and rich when he landed the show Friends, and now David feels a bit guilty about having all this success, perhaps because he sees so many others not succeeding like him. David also hasn't had to struggle much in his life, and him being insecure about his wealth and success adds into this too. And well, being insecure and feeling guilty for being so rich and well off, that's all fine and dandy too. I mean, it's unnecessary, but I also understand him feeling that way. But what really is bad and totally wrong here is Dave making this all about race and white privilege, when it really has very little, if anything, to do with that at all. In the end, it's Dave's guilt about being wildly popular and rich for a time, and also his current dwindling relevance that brought us to this awkward position we're seeing today, where not only the anti-SJWs like us are laughing and calling him out, but also even woke minorities on his side are taking notice too, and asking Dave to check himself. For example, this CNN article goes over how one of the actresses from that show called Living Single, well, she pointed out how they were an all-black version of Friends that already happened, and Living Single actually predated Friends by a whole year, both of those shows containing casts of 6 people. The big difference was, of course, Living Single was all black, and no one's ever heard of that show, and it wasn't as popular. And of course, Friends was all white people, and it became a huge hit and wildly popular, and it's still a media phenomenon. This all goes to show how bad of an idea David had before, and how wrong he was about this going woke with Friends shit. So it shouldn't be surprised that this weak-willed, self-loathing wannabe SJW, well, Dave even had to apologize at the end of all this. Here he tweets out in response to that Living Single actress, further kowtowing to minorities and showing us he's not someone we should be listening to or looking up to at all. What do you guys think? Should Friends get a woke reboot like how Dave suggests? Or did we already have shows like that and their lackluster track records show us that this idea would fail and is totally unnecessary? Comment your thoughts on everything below, and thanks for watching No Bullshit. Hit that like button to help support this channel, and we'll see y'all next time.